"You clumsy little fool," Richard hissed, his fingers digging into my upper arm hard enough to bruise. "Do you have any idea how much you just embarrassed me in front of these people?" My cheeks burned as 200 pairs of eyes watched my humiliation unfold. The crystal had slipped from my trembling fingers during Richard's introduction of me to his business associates, an introduction that had consisted of him detailing every single one of my supposed inadequacies while they laughed into their drinks. "I'm sorry," I whispered, trying to pull away from his grip. "It was an accident." "Everything with you is an accident, Sarah." His voice dripped with contempt as he yanked me closer, his expensive cologne overwhelming. "Your existence is an accident I'm starting to deeply regret." We'd only been married 6 months. 6 months since I'd said yes to his proposal at my mother's bedside, desperate to secure the medical care she needed. 6 months since I'd signed away my freedom for her chance at life. And 3 months since she'd passed anyway, leaving me trapped in this gilded cage with a man who'd revealed his true nature the moment the ring was on my finger. "Richard, please, you're hurting me," I said quietly, acutely aware of the whispers spreading through the crowd. "You don't know what hurt is." His smile never wavered, perfect white teeth gleaming for our audience. To anyone watching from a distance, we might have looked like any other couple having a private conversation. But keep testing me, and you'll find out. The Grand Venetian Hotel in Manhattan always hosted the most exclusive charity galas, and tonight's event was no exception. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Old money mingled with new. Deals were brokered over caviar and Dom Perignon, and everyone pretended not to notice the little dramas playing out in the corners. Richard finally released my arm, leaving me swaying slightly in the 2 high heels he'd insisted I wear. "Clean yourself up. You look pathetic, and for God's sake, try not to cause any more scenes." He walked away, already laughing with a group of silver-haired men who controlled half the real estate in the city. I stood frozen, debris from the shattered glass glittering around my feet like fallen stars. A server appeared with a small dustpan, avoiding my eyes as she swept up the evidence of my disgrace. I murmured my thanks, but she was already gone, melting back into the efficient invisible army that kept events like these running smoothly. I needed air. I needed to breathe. I needed to be anywhere but here. The ballroom opened onto a sprawling terrace overlooking Central Park, and I slipped through the French doors into the cool November night. The sounds of the party faded to a muffled murmur behind me as I walked to the far edge of the terrace, where shadows pooled between the decorative topiaries. My hands were shaking. Everything was shaking. I gripped the stone balustrade and tried to steady my breathing, but the panic was rising in my throat like a tide. How had I ended up here? How had I let my life spiral so completely out of control? The answer was simple, really. Love? Or what I'd mistaken for love. Richard had been charming during our whirlwind courtship, attentive and generous when my mother was dying. He'd promised to take care of everything, to take care of me, and I'd been too exhausted and grief-stricken to see the red flags. By the time the mask slipped, we were already married, and I'd already signed the prenuptial agreement his lawyers had presented. An agreement that left me with absolutely nothing if I chose to leave. No money, no assets, nothing. I'd walked into the marriage with student loan debt, and walked out of my mother's funeral with Richard's ring on my finger, and his control wrapped around my life like a vice. You should go back inside before you catch cold. I spun around, heart hammering. A man stood in the shadows near the door, smoke curling from the cigarette held loosely between his fingers. I hadn't even noticed him there. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude, I stammered. You're not intruding. This is a public terrace. He stepped forward into a pool of light from the ballroom, and I caught my breath. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to glow in the dim light. His tuxedo was impeccably tailored, fitting his tall, athletic frame like it had been made for him, which it probably had been. There was something about him that commanded attention, an air of absolute authority that made Richard's posturing look like a child playing dress-up. I just needed some air, I said, wrapping my arms around myself. So I gathered. He took a drag from his cigarette, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your husband seems like quite a character. Heat flooded my face. You saw that. Everyone saw that. He flicked ash over the balustrade. The question is why you let him treat you that way. Anger flared in my chest, cutting through the humiliation. You don't know anything about my situation. No, he agreed calmly, but I know what I saw. A man who enjoys making his wife feel small in front of an audience. A man who mistakes cruelty for power. And what do you know about power? The words came out sharper than I'd intended, fueled by 6 months of swallowing my pride and biting my tongue. His smile was slow and dangerous. Everything. Before I could respond, the terrace doors burst open and Richard emerged, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. His eyes cut to the stranger. Am I interrupting something? Your wife needed fresh air, the man said, his voice utterly neutral. I was just keeping her company. Richard's jaw tightened. He grabbed my wrist, his grip deliberately painful. Well, the company she needs is mine. We're leaving. Richard, wait. Now, Sarah. The stranger's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those blue eyes. Something cold and calculating that made me shiver. Enjoy your evening, he said softly, and turned back toward the shadows. Richard dragged me through the ballroom, his fingers like iron shackles around my wrist. People parted for us, their conversations pausing just long enough to watch us pass, then resuming in urgent whispers. The ride home in the back of the town car was silent and terrifying. Richard stared out the window, his jaw working with barely contained rage, while I pressed myself against the opposite door and tried to become invisible. When we reached our Upper East Side penthouse, he exploded. Who was that man? He demanded, backing me against the foyer wall. Who the hell were you talking to? I don't know. I've never seen him before. Don't lie to me! His hand slammed into the wall beside my head, making me flinch. I saw the way you were looking at him. I wasn't looking at him anyway, I said, my voice breaking. Richard, please, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my face. Because if I ever catch you embarrassing me like that again, if I ever see you talking to another man like that again, you'll wish you'd never been born. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't dare wipe them away. Any movement might set him off further. Go to your room, he said finally, his voice dropping to something worse than shouting. I can't stand to look at you right now. I fled to the guest bedroom that had become my sanctuary, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. The main bedroom with its California king and his and hers closets had been abandoned months ago, when Richard decided my presence in his bed was no longer required. I slid down the door and wrapped my arms around my knees, letting the sobs come in great gasping waves. This was my life now. This was what I'd chosen. Except I hadn't really chosen it, had I? I'd been backed into a corner, desperate and afraid, and Richard had offered what looked like salvation. By the time I realized it was a trap, the jaws had already closed around me. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, but eventually the tears stopped, and a strange, crystalline clarity settled over me. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells, flinching from raised voices, wearing long sleeves to hide the bruises. I didn't care about the prenup, didn't care about the money. I'd been poor before. I could be poor again. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would start making plans. I'd find a lawyer, figure out my options, start building an escape route, even if it took months to execute. The decision brought a fragile sense of peace. I pulled myself to my feet, changed into pajamas, and crawled into bed. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally arrived, it was haunted by blue eyes and shadows, and the smoke from a stranger's cigarette curling into the night. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Richard traveled for business, which gave me breathing room to think and plan. I contacted a divorce attorney, a woman named Helen Moreau, who specialized in difficult separations. She'd listened to my story with a grim expression and confirmed what I already knew. The prenup was airtight, but she could still help me get out. "It won't be easy," she'd warned, "and you won't walk away with much. But you'll walk away free, and sometimes that's worth more than money." I'd agreed to her retainer, draining my small emergency fund to pay for her services. It was worth it. Freedom was worth it, but I needed to be smart. I needed to wait for the right moment, needed to have all my ducks in a row before I made my move. Richard had powerful friends and expensive lawyers. One wrong step, and he could make my life even more miserable than it already was. The charity gala felt like a distant nightmare, fading at the edges except for one persistent memory that refused to dim. The stranger with the blue eyes who'd seen through Richard in a single glance. I wondered who he was. I wondered if I'd ever see him again. I got my answer on a cold Tuesday evening when Richard announced we were having dinner at Il Posto, one of the most exclusive Italian restaurants in the city. "Important clients," he said tersely. "Wear something appropriate, and for God's sake, try not to embarrass me this time." Il Posto occupied the ground floor of a historic brownstone in Tribeca, its interior all warm wood and soft candlelight. The maitre d' greeted Richard like an old friend and led us to a private dining room in the back. 3 men were already seated at the table. 2 of them were older, silver-haired, and distinguished in expensive suits. The third was younger, perhaps in his 30s, with slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and standing near the window, holding a glass of wine and looking like he owned the entire building, was the stranger from the terrace. Our eyes met across the room, and for just a moment something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Surprise. And then it was gone, replaced by cool indifference. "Richard," one of the older men boomed, rising to shake hands. "Good to see you. Allow me to introduce our associates. This is Vincent Romano, his son Marco, and Luca Moretti." Luca Moretti. The name clicked into place with all the subtlety of a gunshot. I'd heard that name before, whispered in certain circles, mentioned in news articles that danced around the truth with careful euphemisms. Luca Moretti wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just powerful. He was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that came with rumors of organized crime, political connections, and business dealings that existed in the shadows between legal and lethal. And I'd stood on a terrace with him, alone, trading words like we were equals. Richard's hand clamped around my elbow. "This is my wife, Sarah." I murmured polite greetings as we took our seats. I ended up directly across from Luca, which meant I'd be spending the entire meal trying not to meet his eyes. The conversation flowed around me, business talk, market trends, developments in the financial district. Richard was at his most charming, laughing at jokes and telling stories designed to impress. He barely acknowledged my existence except to refill my wineglass when it was empty, a show of attentiveness for our companions. "So, Sarah," Vincent Romano said suddenly, turning his attention to me, "what do you do to keep busy while your husband is building his empire?" I started, but Richard cut me off. "Sarah keeps herself occupied with the usual things," he said smoothly. "Shopping, spa days, lunch with friends. The luxuries of being well taken care of, right, darling?" It was a lie. I had no friends left in the city. Richard had systematically isolated me from everyone I knew, claiming they weren't good enough for our new social circle. And I certainly wasn't spending my days shopping. Richard monitored every penny I spent, questioning every purchase, using money as just another form of control. "Actually," I heard myself say, surprising even myself, "I used to teach English literature, before I got married." Richard's head whipped toward me, but I kept my eyes on Vincent. "Literature," Vincent said warmly. "How wonderful. Are you a reader, then?" "Yes, She reads romance novels, mostly," Richard interrupted with a condescending laugh. "Trash, really, but it keeps her entertained." Heat flooded my face. I did read romance novels, yes, but I also read poetry and classic literature and contemporary fiction. I'd had a small book blog before Richard made me shut it down, claiming it was embarrassing for his wife to be wasting time on the internet. "I don't think any reading is trash," Luca said quietly, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down. His eyes were fixed on Richard. People who dismiss entire genres usually lack the intelligence to appreciate them. The table went silent. Richard's face turned an ugly shade of red. "I'm sure you're right," he said through gritted teeth. "I was only joking, of course." "Of course," Luca agreed, but his tone suggested he didn't believe that for a second. The rest of the meal was excruciating. Richard seethed in his seat, drinking more wine than usual, his responses to questions becoming increasingly curt. I could feel the anger radiating off him in waves, and I knew I'd pay for this later. When dessert was finally cleared and coffee served, Marco Romano leaned back in his chair. "So, Richard, tell us about this development deal you've been pitching. My father and I are very interested in the details." Richard launched into his presentation, pulling up charts and projections on his tablet. While he was distracted, I excused myself to find the restroom. The hallway outside the private dining room was mercifully quiet. I found the ladies' room and locked myself in a stall, pressing my palms against the cool tile wall and trying to calm my racing heart. I'd made everything worse, so much worse. Richard would be furious, and his fury always found outlets that left me bruised and broken. When I finally emerged and washed my hands, checking my reflection in the mirror to make sure my makeup hadn't smudged, I took a deep breath and opened the door. Luca Moretti was leaning against the wall opposite the restroom, hands in his pockets, waiting. I froze. "We need to talk," he said quietly. I should get back. Richard will wonder where I am." "Richard is currently boring my associates with pie charts. You have a few minutes." He studied my face. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're terrified." He pushed off from the wall, moving closer. "And you're going to go home with him tonight, and he's going to hurt you because he thinks you embarrassed him. Again." My throat closed up. "You don't know that." "Don't I?" His voice was soft, almost gentle. "I've known men like your husband my entire life. Small men who need to make everyone around them smaller to feel powerful. I know exactly what he is." Tears burned in my eyes. "Why do you care?" "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "But I do." We stood there in the hallway, the sounds of the restaurant fading to white noise around us. His presence was overwhelming, magnetic, terrifying, in a completely different way than Richard was. "I'm leaving him," I whispered. "I've hired a lawyer. I'm making plans. I just need a little more time." Something shifted in his expression. "Good. That's good." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into my hand. "But if you need help before then, if things get worse, you call that number. Anytime, day or night." I looked down at the card. It was simple, expensive cardstock with just a phone number embossed in black. No name, no title, nothing else. "I can't," I said, trying to hand it back. "Richard would. If he found this, then don't let him find it." His fingers closed around mine, pushing the card back toward me. "Hide it. Memorize the number if you have to. But keep it." Footsteps echoed in the hallway. We sprang apart as a server rounded the corner, carrying a tray of drinks. "I should go," I said quickly, tucking the card into my clutch. "Sarah." His voice stopped me. "When he hurts you, and he will, remember that you don't have to accept it. Remember that there are people in this world who would burn everything to the ground before letting someone lay hands on you." I fled back to the dining room, my heart pounding, Luca's words echoing in my head. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Richard finished his presentation. Hands were shaken, promises were made, and then we were in the car heading home, and I could feel the storm building. He waited until we were in the penthouse, until the door was locked, and we were alone. "What the hell was that?" he exploded. "You made me look like a fool." "Richard, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to contradict me? You didn't mean to draw attention to yourself? You didn't mean to flirt with Luca Moretti right in front of me?" I wasn't flirting. I barely even spoke to him. His hand cracked across my face before I even saw it coming. The force of it sent me stumbling backward, and I crashed into the console table, sending a vase of flowers shattering to the floor. "Don't you dare lie to me," he screamed. "I saw the way you looked at him. The way he looked at you. Do you have any idea who that man is? Do you have any idea what he could do to me, to us, if you piss him off?" I pressed my hand to my stinging cheek, tasting blood where my lip had split against my teeth. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the automatic response of 6 months of conditioning. Sorry isn't good enough anymore. He advanced on me, and I scrambled backward, glass crunching under my heels. "I'm done with your apologies. I'm done with your incompetence. I'm done with you." His fist closed around my throat, cutting off my air. He slammed me against the wall, his face inches from mine, spittle flying as he raged. "You're nothing without me. Do you understand? Nothing. You think you can leave? You think you can just walk away? I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you end up on the street where you belong." Black spots danced across my vision. I clawed at his hand, desperate for air, but his grip only tightened. This was it, I realized with crystal clarity. This was the moment he'd been building toward for months. This was when he'd finally go too far. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. He released me and I collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing, my lungs burning. "Get out of my sight," he said coldly. "And think very carefully about your next move, Sarah. Because it might be your last." I crawled to the guest room, locked the door, and sat with my back against it, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. My phone was still in my clutch. With trembling fingers, I pulled out Luca's card and stared at the number. I couldn't call. It was insane. I didn't even know him. He was a stranger, a dangerous stranger, and getting him involved would only make things worse. But as I sat there in the dark, my throat aching and my face throbbing, I took a picture of the card and saved it to my phone under a fake name. Just in case. Just in case I needed someone who understood what men like Richard were capable of. Just in case I needed someone who could fight fire with fire. I didn't sleep that night. I packed a small bag with essentials, documents, some clothes, cash I'd been secretly saving. I hid it in the back of my closet, behind boxes of shoes I never wore. When morning came, Richard was already gone. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Flying to Boston for meetings, back Friday. Behave yourself." 3 days. I had 3 days to figure out my next move. I called Helen Moreau and told her what happened. She listened in grim silence, then said the words I'd been dreading. "You need to leave. Now. Today. Before he comes back. But the paperwork, I'll handle the paperwork. We'll file for divorce and a restraining order simultaneously. But Sarah, listen to me. If you stay, next time he might not stop. Next time he might kill you." She was right. I knew she was right. But where could I go? I had no family left, no friends I could turn to. Richard had made sure of that. "There are shelters," Helen said gently. "Safe houses. I can make some calls." A shelter. God, how had my life come to this? I spent the day in a daze, making preparations. I transferred what little money I had to a new bank account Richard didn't know about. I changed my passwords. I scheduled an appointment with Helen for the next morning, and when night fell and I was alone in the silent penthouse, I pulled up the photo of Luca's card and stared at it. He'd said any time, day or night. He'd said if I needed help. But what kind of help could he offer? And what would he expect in return? I was still staring at my phone when it rang, making me jump. Unknown number. Probably a spam call, but something made me answer. "Hello?" "Sarah." Luca's voice was unmistakable. "Where are you right now?" My heart stopped. "How did you get this number? That's not important. Are you safe?" Yes. Richard's traveling. He won't be back until Friday." "Good. I'm sending a car to pick you up in 20 minutes. Pack a bag." "What?" "No, I can't just—" "Sarah." His voice turned hard. I saw your face when you came back from the restroom last night. I saw the fear. And I had my people make some discreet inquiries about your husband, so I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to answer me honestly. Did he hurt you after you left the restaurant? Tears welled up. I touched my throat, still tender from Richard's hands. Yes, I whispered. The silence on the other end was deafening. When he spoke again, his voice was cold enough to freeze oceans. Pack a bag. My driver will be there in 20 minutes. You're not spending another night in that apartment. Luca, I can't just leave with you. I don't even know you. No, you don't. But you know your husband, and you know what he's capable of. So you have a choice to make, Sarah. You can stay there and wait for him to come back and finish what he started. Or you can get in the car when it arrives and let me help you. Why? My voice broke. Why would you do this for a complete stranger? He was quiet for a long moment. Because nobody helped my mother when she needed it, and I've regretted that for 20 years. Pack your bag, Sarah. The car is already on its way. He hung up. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, phone clutched in my hand, my mind racing. This was crazy. Absolutely insane. Luca Moretti was practically a mobster. Getting involved with him could be just as dangerous as staying with Richard. But Richard had tried to kill me last night, and he would try again. I made my decision. I grabbed the bag I'd already packed, added a few more items, and was waiting in the lobby when a sleek black Mercedes pulled up exactly 20 minutes later. The driver got out, a hulking man in a dark suit who looked like he could bench press a car. Mrs. Peterson? Yes. Mr. Moretti sent me. May I take your bag? I handed it over and slid into the back seat, my hands shaking. As the car pulled away from the curb, I watched my building disappear in the rear window. I'd just left my husband. I'd just gotten into a car with a man I didn't know, on the word of another man I knew even less, but for the first time in 6 months, I felt like I could breathe. The car drove for about 40 minutes, heading out of Manhattan and into Brooklyn. We pulled up in front of a beautiful brownstone in Park Slope, lights glowing warmly in the windows. The driver opened my door. This way, ma'am. He led me up the front steps and knocked. The door opened immediately, revealing Luca in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He'd never looked more dangerous, or more handsome. Thank you, Antonio, he said to the driver, then turned to me. Come in. I stepped into a foyer that was elegant but lived in, with hardwood floors and artwork on the walls. Nothing like Richard's sterile showpiece penthouse. This is your home? I asked. One of them. He closed the door behind us. Are you hungry? When did you last eat? I tried to remember. Yesterday morning, I think. His jaw tightened. Kitchen is this way. He led me to a massive kitchen with marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. Within minutes, he'd assembled a plate of bread, cheese, cured meats, and olives, setting it in front of me along with a glass of red wine. Eat, he commanded gently. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until I started. The food was delicious, and for a few minutes we sat in silence while I ate and he watched. Thank you, I said finally, for this. For everything. But I can't stay here. Why not? Because I don't know you. Because this is crazy. Because you're... I stopped myself. Because I'm what? His eyes challenged me. Dangerous? A criminal? Is that what you were going to say? Are you? I asked quietly. A criminal? He smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm a businessman, Sarah. I own restaurants, real estate, import companies. Everything I do is legal. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. But it's the only one you're going to get right now. He leaned forward. Here's what I'm willing to tell you. I'm someone who has resources, connections, the ability to keep you safe while you figure out your next move. Your husband can't touch you here, and if he tries, he'll learn very quickly why that's a mistake. But why? I asked again. Why would you do this? His expression softened slightly. I told you. My mother. She was married to a man like Richard. Charming in public, cruel in private. By the time anyone realized what was happening, It was too late. She died when I was 15. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially. He trailed off, his hands clenching into fists. Let's just say I know what men like your husband are capable of. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be sorry. Just let me help you. He stood and held out his hand. Come on, I'll show you to your room. I followed him up a staircase to the second floor. He opened a door to a beautiful bedroom with a queen-sized bed, its own bathroom, and windows overlooking a small garden. You'll be safe here, he said. The house is secure. Antonio and his brother Marco are always nearby. And I'm just down the hall if you need anything. Luca, I didn't know what to say, how to express the tangle of fear and gratitude and confusion churning inside me. He seemed to understand. Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow. And Sarah? He paused in the doorway. You did the right thing. Leaving. It takes more courage than you know. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. I'd gone from being a prisoner in my own home to being a guest in the house of one of the most dangerous men in New York. But as I lay down and pulled the soft comforter around me, I felt safer than I had in months. And when sleep finally claimed me, I dreamed not of Richard's hands around my throat, but of blue eyes and quiet promises in the dark. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a disorienting moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came flooding back. I'd left Richard. I was in Luca Moretti's house. God, what had I done? After a quick shower in the luxurious bathroom, the water pressure alone was a revelation after the temperamental penthouse plumbing. I dressed in jeans and a sweater and ventured downstairs. Luca was in the kitchen, reading a newspaper and drinking espresso. He looked up as I entered. Good morning. Sleep well? Better than I expected, I admitted. He poured me a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. I took the liberty of having my lawyer contact yours. Helen Moreau, yes? I nearly dropped the cup. How did you... I make it my business to know things. They've already filed the divorce papers and the restraining order. Your husband was served this morning at his hotel in Boston. The room tilted. Already? But I thought that usually takes... Usually, yes. But I have connections in the court system. People who owe me favors. The restraining order is temporary for now, but there's a hearing scheduled for next week to make it permanent. I sank onto a stool, overwhelmed. Luca, I can't let you do all this. I can't afford... You're not paying for anything. His tone left no room for argument. Consider it handled. But why? I asked for what felt like the 100th time. You barely know me. He set down his coffee cup and studied me with those intense blue eyes. Maybe that's exactly why. Because I don't know you. Because you're not connected to my world, to my business, to all the complications that come with my life. You're just a woman who needed help, and I'm in a position to provide it. Nobody does something for nothing, I said quietly. What do you want from me? His smile was slow and devastating. Right now? Nothing. But ask me again in a few weeks, and my answer might be different. Heat flooded my face, and I looked away. Over the next few days, I settled into a strange new routine. Luca left early for his various businesses, returning in the evenings. Antonio and Marco were always nearby, silent but watchful. I had the run of the house, which was filled with books and art and comfortable furniture that actually looked lived in. Helen called to update me on the legal proceedings. Richard was fighting the restraining order, of course, claiming I was making false accusations. But she sounded confident. We have medical records now, she explained. The photos you took of the bruises, the documentation from your previous doctor's visits. It's building a strong case. Medical records I didn't remember authorizing the release of. But when I mentioned it to Luca that evening, he just shrugged. Your lawyer needed evidence. I made sure she got it. How? It's better if you don't ask. That should have scared me. It probably should have sent me running. But instead, I felt oddly protected. Like for the first time in my adult life, someone was actually looking out for me. On the 4th day, Luca came home early and found me in his library, curled up in an armchair with a worn copy of Jane Eyre. "Romance novels?" he asked with a slight smile. I laughed. Classic literature, actually. Though I suppose there's romance in it, too. He sat across from me. "Your husband was wrong, you know, about reading, about you." He was wrong about a lot of things. He was. Luca leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I did some digging into his finances. He's not as successful as he pretends to be. In fact, he's deeply in debt. That deal he was pitching to the Romanos? It's a house of cards waiting to collapse." I set the book down. "Does that mean—" "It means his lawyers won't be as expensive as yours for much longer, and it means the prenup he had you sign might not be worth the paper it's printed on, if he's been hiding assets and debts." Hope fluttered in my chest. "So, I might actually get something?" "You might get everything." His smile turned predatory. "Especially once certain regulatory agencies receive anonymous tips about his business practices. Tax evasion is such a nasty thing to be investigated for. Luca, yes or no, Sarah, do you want me to destroy him?" I thought about 6 months of hell, about Richard's hands around my throat, about every cruel word, every public humiliation, every moment of fear. "Yes," I whispered. "Then consider it done." That evening, we had dinner together for the first time, a simple meal of pasta and wine that Luca cooked himself. He was surprisingly domestic, moving around the kitchen with the same confidence he brought to everything else. "Where did you learn to cook?" I asked. "My grandmother. She raised me after my mother died. Taught me that knowing how to feed yourself and others is a form of power." He plated the carbonara with expert precision. And she was right. Some of my best business has been conducted over meals I've prepared myself. We ate at the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months. Luca was easy to talk to, surprisingly funny, and he listened when I spoke. Really listened, like my words mattered. "Tell me something about yourself," he said as we finished the meal. "Something nobody knows." I thought for a moment. I wanted to be a writer once. Before teaching, before Richard, before everything. I wanted to write novels. Why didn't you? Life got in the way. Practicality. Fear that I wasn't good enough. I shrugged. "All the usual reasons people give up on their dreams." "You could still write," he pointed out. "You have time now. Freedom." "Maybe," I said softly, "if I figure out what comes next." He reached across the table and took my hand. The touch was electric, sending shivers up my arm. "What comes next is whatever you want, Sarah. You're not trapped anymore. You're not powerless. Remember that." 2 weeks passed. The divorce proceedings moved forward with remarkable speed. Luca's influence at work, no doubt. Richard tried to contact me dozens of times, violating the restraining order, but Antonio and Marco made sure he never got close. And then, on a cold December evening, everything changed. I was in the library when Luca came home, his expression stormy. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. "Your husband is making noise about you living here. He's hired a private investigator and he's planning to use our arrangement against you in the divorce." My stomach dropped. "What kind of arrangement? We haven't— There's nothing—" "I know that. You know that. But appearances can be twisted, and he's going to claim you left him for me, that you've been having an affair. That's insane. That's Richard." Luca ran a hand through his hair, and unfortunately it might complicate things legally. I stood, panic rising in my chest. "I'll leave. I'll go to a shelter like Helen suggested. I can't let this ruin everything." "You're not going anywhere." His voice was firm. "We just need to be smarter about this." "How?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. "There is one way to make this all go away. One way to ensure Richard can't touch you, can't spin this narrative, can't do anything except accept defeat and move on." "What way?" Marry me." The words hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. "What?" I managed to choke out. "Marry me," he repeated. "Not for real, well, legally real, but a marriage of convenience. We sign a prenup that protects us both. We present a united front. And Richard's entire case falls apart because you're not a woman who left him for nothing. You're a woman who left him for someone better. That's crazy. Is it? You need protection and security. I can provide both. And in return, I get..." He paused. "Let's just say there are certain business advantages to being a married man. Perception matters in my world. Luca, I just got out of one marriage. I can't jump into another, even a fake one. Then don't think of it as a marriage. Think of it as a partnership, a business arrangement between two people who are mutually beneficial to each other." He stepped closer. "I'm not Richard, Sarah. I'm not going to control you or hurt you or take away your freedom. You'll have your own money, your own life. The only thing I'm asking is that we present the appearance of a relationship when necessary. And what happens when you meet someone you actually want to marry." Something flickered in his eyes. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it." I should have said no. Any sane person would have said no. But I thought about Richard, about his private investigator, about the ways he could still hurt me even from a distance. And I thought about Luca, who'd given me safety when I had nowhere else to turn, who'd treated me with more respect in 2 weeks than Richard had in 6 months. "Okay," I whispered, "but I want everything in writing, clear terms, an exit strategy." His smile was blinding. "Of course. I'll have my lawyers draw up the papers tomorrow." 3 days later, we were married in a private ceremony at City Hall. Helen served as my witness, Antonio as his. I wore a simple cream dress, and Luca wore a charcoal suit that made his eyes look impossibly blue. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Luca leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to my cheek. "Thank you," he whispered against my skin, "for trusting me." The papers were filed, photographs were taken, and within 24 hours, every society page in New York was running the story. Socialite Sarah Peterson leaves troubled marriage for mysterious businessman Luca Moretti. Richard's lawyers withdrew his appeals. The divorce was finalized within a month, and I walked away with enough money to start over, along with a new last name and a husband who slept in a different bedroom and treated me like a business partner. It should have been enough. But as the weeks turned into months, I found myself wanting more. Luca was gone often, managing his various enterprises, but when he was home, we fell into comfortable rhythms. Dinners together, discussions about books and art and philosophy, long walks through Prospect Park where we talked about everything and nothing. He never pushed for more than I was willing to give, never demanded anything beyond the public appearances we'd agreed to, but I saw the way he looked at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like I was something precious, something worth protecting, and I found myself looking at him the same way. Spring came to Brooklyn, painting the trees in green and the flowers in brilliant colors. We'd been married for 3 months when Luca invited me to a charity gala, ironically at the same Grand Venetian hotel where we'd first met. "We don't have to go if you're not comfortable," he said, "but it would be good for appearances. Show that you're thriving. Happy." I am happy, I realized as I said it. Happier than I've been in a long time. His expression softened. "Good. You deserve to be happy, Sarah." The night of the gala, I wore a deep blue gown that Luca had sent to the house. A gift, he'd said, not an obligation. It fit perfectly, hugging my curves in all the right places. When I came downstairs, he was waiting in the foyer, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. He looked up as I descended, and something raw and hungry flashed across his face before he could hide it. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you." I accepted the arm he offered. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The gala was everything I remembered, glittering and excessive and full of New York's elite. But this time, I walked in not as Richard's cowed wife, but as Luca Moretti's equal. People who'd witnessed my humiliation months ago now greeted me with warmth and respect, because I was with him, because his power protected me. Because everyone knew that crossing me meant crossing him, and nobody was stupid enough to do that. We were making our way through the crowd when a familiar voice cut through the chatter. "Well, well, the happy couple." I turned to find Richard standing there, slightly drunk, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. Luca's hand tightened on my waist. "Walk away, Peterson." "Or what?" Richard sneered. "You'll have your thugs rough me up? Everyone knows what you are, Moretti. Everyone knows you're nothing but a—" "Choose your next words very carefully," Luca said softly, and the menace in his voice made Richard take an involuntary step back. "Because they might be the last thing you say with all your teeth intact." "You think you're so powerful," Richard spat. "You think you won. But I know the truth. I know she's just using you for your money, just like she used me. She's nothing but a gold-digging—" I didn't think. I just moved. My hand cracked across Richard's face with enough force to snap his head to the side. "Don't you ever," I said, my voice shaking with rage, "speak about me again. Don't contact me. Don't even think about me. Because if you do, I promise you, my husband will make you regret the day you were born." Silence fell across the ballroom. Every eye was on us. Richard touched his reddening cheek, his expression murderous. But before he could respond, Luca stepped between us. "She asked you politely," he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "I won't be so polite. Come near my wife again, and you'll disappear. Not to jail, not to a hospital. Just disappear." "Do I make myself clear?" The threat hung in the air like smoke. Nobody doubted he meant it. Richard's face went white. Without another word, he turned and fled the ballroom. Slowly, conversation resumed around us. An orchestra began playing, and Luca turned to me, offering his hand. "Dance with me?" I took his hand and let him lead me to the dance floor. As we moved together to a slow waltz, I was acutely aware of every point where our bodies touched. "That was quite a performance," he murmured. "Which part?" "All of it. Though I particularly enjoyed watching you slap him. Very satisfying." I laughed despite myself. "I've wanted to do that for a long time." "I know." His hand spread across the small of my back, pulling me closer. "You're not his victim anymore, Sarah. You're not anyone's victim. You're a force of nature." I looked up into those blue eyes that had haunted my dreams for months. "I wouldn't be any of those things without you." "Yes, you would. I just helped you remember who you always were." The song ended, but we didn't move apart. We stood there on the dance floor, swaying slightly, lost in each other. "Luca," I whispered, "this arrangement we have, this marriage that's not really a marriage." "Yes?" "I don't want it to be fake anymore." His breath caught. "Sarah, I know what the contract says. I know what we agreed to. But somewhere along the way, things changed. For me, at least. And I hoped, maybe for you too." He cupped my face in his hands, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to hear you say that. So you feel it too?" "From the moment I saw you on that terrace," he admitted. "Brave and broken and beautiful. I told myself to keep my distance, told myself you needed protection, not complications. But Sarah, you've become the complication I can't live without." He kissed me then, in the middle of the dance floor, in front of everyone. And it wasn't the chaste kiss from our wedding. It was hungry and possessive and full of months of denied desire. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the entire ballroom had stopped to watch. Luca kept his eyes on me. "Let's go home." "Yes," I agreed. "Let's go home." We left the gala early, tangled in the back of the Mercedes like teenagers, unable to keep our hands off each other. Antonio drove with professional discretion, never once glancing in the rearview mirror. The brownstone had never looked more beautiful than it did that night, lit from within, welcoming us home. Our home. Luca carried me over the threshold, a gesture that should have been silly but felt perfect, and we tumbled into his bedroom, shedding expensive clothes and careful pretenses. "Are you sure?" he asked, even as his hands roamed my skin. "We can stop. We can wait." "I've been waiting my whole life for someone to look at me the way you do," I whispered against his mouth. "I don't want to wait anymore." What happened next was everything I'd never had. Tenderness and passion, power and vulnerability. He worshipped every inch of me, whispering in Italian, words I didn't fully understand but felt in my soul. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms, I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" he asked immediately, concerned. "No." I laughed through the tears. "No, it's just, I didn't know it could be like this, that I could feel safe and desired at the same time." He kissed my forehead, my eyelids, my tear-stained cheeks. "You're safe with me. Always. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." "The rest of your life?" I echoed. "That's a long time for a marriage of convenience." "Then it's a good thing this stopped being convenient the moment you walked into my kitchen and challenged everything I thought I knew about what I wanted." He pulled me closer. "Marry me, Sarah, for real this time. Not because of contracts or appearances or protection, but because I love you, because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "We're already married," I pointed out with a smile. "Then marry me again, in a church, with our friends, with vows that mean something. Marry me because you want to, not because you have to." I pretended to consider it, drawing out the moment. "Will there be cake?" "The biggest damn cake you've ever seen." "Then yes." I kissed him softly. Yes to all of it. 6 months later, we renewed our vows in a small chapel in Brooklyn, surrounded by the people who'd become our family. Helen was there, along with the Romanos, Antonio and Marco, and even Luca's grandmother, who flew in from Italy and told me in broken English that I was exactly what her grandson needed. I wore white again, but this time with joy instead of resignation. And when Luca slipped a new ring onto my finger, a vintage sapphire that matched his eyes, I knew this was real. This was forever. "You know," I said during our first dance as we celebrated in the brownstones' garden, that night at the gala, when I whispered, "Help me," in Italian, because I'd been secretly learning the language. "I remember," he said with a smile. "Your accent was terrible, by the way." I swatted his chest. "You understood me." "I did, and I meant what I said then." His expression turned serious. "I'll make anyone who tries to hurt you regret they were ever born. That's not a promise, Sarah. That's a fact." "My dangerous husband," I teased, but warmth flooded through me. "Your husband who loves you," he corrected. "Who will protect you? Who will stand beside you while you write those novels you always wanted to write? Who will grow old with you in this house and watch you become everything you were meant to be?" That's a lot of promises. I'm a man who keeps his promises. He dipped me dramatically, making me laugh. Every single one. And as the sun set over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I realized something profound. I'd thought I was running away from a nightmare when I left Richard, but I'd actually been running toward this, toward love, toward safety, toward a man who saw me not as something to control, but as someone to cherish. The broken pieces of Sarah Peterson were gone, transformed in the fire of everything I'd survived. In their place was Sarah Moretti, whole and healed and ready for whatever came next, and with Luca by my side, I knew I could handle anything. Because some fairy tales don't start with "once upon a time." Some start with a whispered plea for help in a language you barely speak, to a dangerous stranger who becomes your salvation. This was my fairy tale, and it was just beginning.